is the land of the Ho-Chunk people. Please take a moment to celebrate and honor this ancestral Ho-Chunk land and the sacred lands of all indigenous peoples. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Ms. Baumann?
Here.
Ms. Berkedal? Dr. Cooper-Stoll?
Here.
Dr. Garcia?
Here.
Dr. Jimenez?
Here.
Ms. Leahy?
Here.
Mr. Korberg?
Here.
Mr. Spivey?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. A quorum of the Board of Education is present, so the regularly scheduled meeting of September 12th, 2022 is called to order, and we'll now have the Pledge of Allegiance. Would you please stand and face the American flag? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll move to approval of agenda.
Move to approve the agenda as presented.
Second. Okay. There's a tie there.
Mr. Spivey.
All right. Well, he pointed to you, so there's still a tie. Moved by Mr. Korberg, and by the flip of a coin, we'll have a second by Mr. Spivey. We will move approval of the agenda as presented unless there's a motion to amend. Is there a motion to amend? Hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed. The motion has carried, and we will move on to public speakers, and we do not have anyone registered to speak. So we will move on to the approval of the superintendent's consent agenda. The consent agenda is a mechanism that is used by the board to deal with routine business that must come before the body. Are there any items that the members want to remove from the consent agenda? Hearing none, is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the items on the superintendent's consent agenda as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by Mr. Korberg and seconded by Ms. Baumann to approve the items on the superintendent's consent agenda. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed. Motion has carried, and we'll move on to the approval of the board consent agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the items on the board consent agenda as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by Mr. Korberg and seconded by Ms. Leahy to approve the items on the board consent agenda. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed. The motion has carried, and we will move on to the candidate interviews. So let me read the process for those interviews. So the superintendent will be placing the names of the 4 candidates in a container. The board secretary will select the names indicating the order in which the candidates are to be seated at the board table. Once the 4 candidates have joined the board at the table, the board president will welcome each candidate. The superintendent will then facilitate the interview questioning, asking the questions in the order the candidates' names were drawn, rotating each question to the next candidate to be answered first. The candidate will have no more than 2 minutes to respond to each question. And the superintendent will monitor this time limit as well. The board will not question any candidate or engage in any dialogue with the candidates during the interviews. At the end of the interviews, the board president will excuse the candidates from the board table, and we will have a 5-minute recess in order for the board to readjust so that we are not all on one side of the table. Give ourselves a little bit of time to deliberate amongst each other individually. And then we will pass out the ballots. Once again, we will not advocate or promote any individual candidate. Each board member will vote for one candidate. The superintendent will collect the votes and tally the responses with the board secretary. The candidate receiving the highest number of votes, but at least 4 votes, shall be elected. If no candidate meets this standard, the board will continue to vote after deleting the name of the candidate who received the least number of votes in the initial vote. If a tie exists after only 2 persons remain for consideration, and in the board president's opinion, further voting will no longer be useful, the board president shall determine the selection with a coin flip. So that is the process that we will use this evening. So if I could have the superintendent and the board secretary please place the names, and then we will proceed.
Anita Woods.
Well, good evening. I get the pleasure of asking the interview questions, and I've been equipped with all the proper items. So you get your 30-second warning, and then I will, just so you know, I will have 2 minutes on my phone. So if you hear a chime, it's probably because my phone is going off. We've reached that 2-minute limit. We will rotate through each of the questions, but I just want to begin by saying thank you to each of you. First of all, for demonstrating your willingness to lead, and then stepping up at a time when obviously we're needing leadership more than ever. So with that brief introduction, let's begin. And we're going to start down at the end. Yes, first selection. Mr. Hannafel was first selected, I believe. And then we'll have each person answer the question, then we'll rotate through. Second question be Ms. Wood, and so on and so forth. First question, and for the audience who's listening in, just so you know, all the candidates have been supplied with the questions in advance. So if we go through a question, we may not repeat it. We may just say, same question to you, and then so on and so forth. First question. Tell us a little bit about yourself, including past and or current school and community involvement, and why are you seeking this office? Mr. Hannafel.
Well, again, Brent Hannafel, local business owner, media marketing group. In terms of school background, went to Winona State, have a degree in recreation and tourism, ended up in University of Oregon with a degree in arts administration. In terms of community involvement, I've sat on boards. Case in point is happening this weekend, Midwest Music Fest. Sat on that board till 2020. Also, I've been connected with Hmong Farmers Corporation. We did a series of online streaming cooking shows called Cooking with Bo. We raised over $6,500 for the farmers during COVID. Season 2 just finished. One component that I'm kind of seeking office, and I talked to a number of you early in the year, was just about sort of toning down the rhetoric. I feel like it was something that I felt that could scare my own children. I have 3 in the district, 2 at Soda and 1 at Lincoln. And I just found it to be unnecessary, intimidating, and kind of scary. And so that was my main point for kind of seeing this come up and wanting to potentially fill that void.
Well, thank you. So we'll move on. Next question, same question, but on to you, Ms. Wood. It's going to repeat it, but if you're ready to go, go for it.
Thank you for having me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
It's really an honor to be here, especially with these candidates. And most of my professional career has been in product strategy in high-tech companies. I took a little bit of a break for 8 years to be in higher education. I was a professor and oversaw some programs at Viterbo University. And as far as community involvement, I'm currently the president of Cooley Region Authentic Learning Council. which is the governance board for La Crosse Polytechnic and Cooley Region Virtual Academy. And I've been on that board for about 6 years now. And before that, I was actively involved in the State Road PTO as well. And all of that came about by a lot of volunteer time in the classroom, and I just loved to be there and was invited to help in more committed ways, so to speak. And I also, before that, was for about 5-6 years on the board of directors, including 3 years as president for the local chapter of the Project Management Institute. And I've provided services to community nonprofits for professional services level, project management strategy and culture training, for example. And the reason I'm here is because for decades now, I've put my passion for lifelong learning into my volunteer. I focused my service to education because education was very important to me as a child. And school was a safe haven for me, and it was very important, and it helped me become the person I am, and this was my way of giving back to kids like me.
Thank you so much. Ms. Moots?
So I'm Emily Moots, and I was an English teacher for 4 years at Logan High School. During that time, I had the opportunity to work with teachers at Central and at Logan to develop and establish the English 10 curriculum, as well as having the opportunity to create the curriculum for strategic learning, which was a class that supported student literacy, as well as the college prep class for the engineering academy. Additionally, I also worked as a resilience champion for Project Aware, which I'm sure many of you are familiar, is the mental health initiative that the district took on board a few years ago. Currently, I am an instructional and outreach librarian at the La Crosse Public Library. Essentially what my job is that I get to do instruction with the community and find ways to make the library resources more accessible to folks. So for example, I work with a lot of nonprofits, and I'm working with the Reach Center. I'm doing a class with the county jail, that's a writing class. I'm also doing a book club with the Recovery Center and some tech hours with the Community Connection Center. I'm currently seeking this spot on the school board because I deeply care about public education, and I believe that I can provide some valuable insight as a former school district of La Crosse educator and a community partner to ensure equitable opportunities for all of our students.
Thank you. Same question to you, Mr. Brownell.
Thank you for having me here. I grew up in a family of educators. My grandmother was a one-room schoolhouse teacher and then a second grade teacher, and then my father was a math professor at UWL. And my formative years were spent growing up in and around the public schools of La Crosse. I continued my public school education at UWL and then became both learner and educator once I started my teaching career in Holman. Aside from being both teaching and learning from students in Sandwich, England for 1 year, the remaining 27 years of my career was spent doing the same thing at Logan High School until my retirement in 2020. Now I'm continuing my evolution as an educator as an ice house educator at Gunderson. Essentially, I'm an actor. Medical symptoms and that kind of thing, simulation for helping the medical personnel improve their skills. While in the classroom, I went above and beyond to help each student have support and a fair shake within and away from the classroom. When I was president of the Teachers Union here in La Crosse, I bargained for staff to have collaborative in-service time to improve their skills for teaching current students, because the teaching environment is also the learning environment. They cannot be treated separately, in my opinion. I am seeking a seat on the board to continue my efforts to improve the learning and teaching environment in La Crosse schools during these turbulent times when so many in the profession are feeling hopeless. I have a proven record of effectively collaborating with stakeholders and coming up with unique jumping-off points for creating forward motion towards solving challenging issues. I hope I am given the opportunity to collaborate and work with the current board and the current superintendent, who are now faced with some of the biggest issues this district has ever experienced.
Thank you so much. On to question number 2. Ms. Wood, we'll begin with you. One responsibility delegated to school board members is advocating for the diverse needs of our students and families within our school district at the local, state, and national level. Within the scope of our governance model, how will you fulfill this responsibility?
I think for me, when I thought about this question, I like to look at outcomes, and I do that a lot in my work, understanding outcomes that we're going after. And by outcomes, I've defined that as human behaviors that drive results or meet expectations, right? And then everything we do should revolve around how do we create more of the human behaviors that we want to see that then drive those results or those the ability to meet expectations. And I think how I would approach this is using my data-informed curiosity. A lot of what I do in my profession and what I do with CRELC is very data-informed. And I don't say data-driven because it's not just about the data, it's data-informed. And I think by taking that approach, I like to look at all the feasible ways that we can solve a particular problem, right? Identify that root problem, and then, use our curiosity to look at the diverse needs and the diverse population and the diverse human behaviors that we want to drive and influence. And as far as governance culture, I think to me that means ensuring that the current and future expectations that we define are accessible to everyone, and that we as a board act as the agent for all of those key stakeholders.
Thank you. Ms. Moots?
I will fulfill the responsibility of advocating for the diverse needs of our students and our families by first practicing active listening. I firmly believe that active listening is one of the most important tools for diversity work. And that's not only just because it's about focusing on the folks and their stories and what they're talking about versus kind of getting into what you might be thinking or saying after they share their story, but also just about responding compassionately and with intention behind the stories that are being shared with us. So that would be one of the first ways that I'd want to approach advocating for the diverse needs. The second is just building trust, because I don't know that advocacy work can happen without trust in our community. And I think that can be built and maintained with honest and clear communication and ensuring transparency with the policy changes that are happening. Additionally, I also think that teachers have an incredible opportunity to advocate for equity of their students and their families. And so I believe that listening to their concerns and to the stories that they're sharing and their experiences would be one of the top priorities that I would have.
Thank you so much. Question number 2, over to you, Mr. Brown.
Thank you. During my 30 years as a public school 912 building level educator, I witnessed the numerous challenges that numerous students brought into class with them each day. I also experienced how often those challenges impeded the students' ability to focus on their education. Being empathetic, an active data collector, and a data-driven problem solver, I collaborated with fellow educators to help students come up with and implement varied solutions to their problems, but always felt there were other student issues needing to be addressed, the equity issues. Each year, new students would replace former students in class and bring with them very similar challenges. Together with addressing their personal challenges is the fact that I didn't teach content, I taught students. Repeatedly, I collaborated with their parents and my fellow educators to improve each student's chance of laying a solid foundation for their own unique future. I choreographed and facilitated their understanding of content pertaining to my chemistry, AP chemistry, and physical science classes. Equally as important, I did the same with their development of lifelong learning skills to help them become more adaptable. My driving passion to this day continues to be ensuring that current and future students have the best possible learning environment in which to thrive while living their respective presents and preparing for their futures. Within the scope of the board's governance model, and have chosen to join you on this board, I'll bring with me my classroom experiences, empathy, and skills, and I'll collaborate with each of you and the superintendent to resolve the systemic issues that exist for all lacrosse students.
Thank you so much, Mr. Brownell. And finally, Mr. Hannafel, question number 2.
Just listening to everyone kind of give the reasons for this, you hear accessible, you hear trust, you hear communication, but I feel like there's a lacking there that I could bring to this board in terms of, everything from marketing campaigns to a content calendar to actually, making plans to actually hand out physical items to digital media, just a resounding voice, whatever this board comes to the conclusion of with the majority, to be able to facilitate that for all learners, for all abilities. I feel like that's what's kind of, I think would aid in, progressing this board, the school district, but also allowing students, I guess that opportunity and parents to be involved in it. There's definitely some clear errors that happened over the past couple of months that I think would kind of facilitate and hush these sort of, I think, unnecessary derogatory comments when they feel they're not being, listened to or actually reached out to.
Thank you so much, appreciate it. And Ms. Moots will start us off with number 3. The third question is, one of our operational expectations policies is OE10 learning environment. Please provide your insights as to why this policy is critical to student learning in a 21st century pluralistic society.
Yeah, thank you. So yes, this policy is critical to student learning because it is just a foundation that's essential for student success. So reading through the policy, a lot of it kind of, reflect and talked about how students should, that folks should really know and understand the policies and procedures of the schools, that students should be individualized and understood and seen. And when I think about my time as a teacher, and what the teachers have just been doing these past few weeks is those first few weeks they really focus on creating that positive learning environment with their students, right? So that the students can feel supported, that they can feel seen and heard, and that is proven in a lot of different, research papers and so on, that that's essential to student success, right? Is that they want to have connection, right? That's kind of human nature, is to want connection. So looking at that policy, it's important for all of us to be familiar as a district of the policies and procedures of the schools, and to make sure that when students are talking to us or to any sort of administration about not feeling supported by staff at the school district of La Crosse, that action is happening, right? That we're talking to each other and we're focusing on how we can actually put action behind an equity-based policy. Because I believe that that's kind of what that learning environment focuses on. It's not just the school at this point, it's the full district.
You must have noticed me reaching for
I
this.
did. It made me nervous.
Good perfume. Forgive me, everybody. I don't think me rude when I reach for this. It's just part of the gig. Mr. Brownell, your response to question number 3?
Thank you. I believe that the prior board's adoption of this policy was a solid beginning towards improving the educational experiences for each student in the district. I'd like to be on the current board to help fully implement this policy in practice, specifically the portions that reference maintaining a climate that is characterized by support and encouragement for high student success, and the importance of ensuring that all policies and procedures regarding student behavior are collaboratively developed. What has your recent data collected on these 2 points shown is a question that I have. And who provided the data? How broad of a sample does the data represent? What changes are already in the works to improve the continued implementation of these operational expectations? From personal experience when I was teaching, the word support that is mentioned had a nebulous meaning from building to building, and what support looked like in practice was even more varied. I believe our building level educators have some very valuable ideas that should be explored, developed, and implemented to support student learning in the 21st century pluralistic society. Directing the superintendent to focus on this would help the district move forward with fully and effectively implementing this policy.
Thank you so much. Mr. Hannafel, number 3.
I mean, it's just, I would say for the majority of students, school is, the only real safe place for them. Hierarchy of needs, if you will. I mean, it just needs to be an ally for all students that are in the district. They're going to school. They're either our kids or they're going to school with our kids, and it just needs to be, a safe place for all learners.
Thank you so much. Ms. Wood?
When we talk about environment, if we're looking at our role as a board, to me, environment is the how we meet our expectations, all of us. And we are the role models, whether that's here on the board or inside the walls of the classroom or on the virtual classroom. We make these learning opportunities, right? The good and the bad. And no matter what that environment is, we move forward. And I think it's important, and I agree with Craig about the teachers being a very important part of that environment. And I almost think that the teachers being, to most of our stakeholders, the teachers are the face of the school district, right? So creating that very strong environment and empowering the teachers to help us build that safe environment, that learning environment for the kids like me who struggled when I was a kid, but also for the kids who have very strong academics, to let them really thrive and, at all levels. I believe that students should leave our care learning from our examples, because they are the ones who are going out into their family lives as adults and into their workplace and creating the same environments. So it's teaching them how to create those environments as well. And then I think that, if there are different interpretations of expectations, students, their parents, the community, that, it's important that we demonstrate how to resolve those conflicts. And communication and policies ensure that consistency and clear expectations.
Thank you so much. Mr. Brownell will get us started with number 4. It's rather lengthy, but for our audience, according to Governance Culture Policy GC7, Board Members' Code of Conduct, board members must 1, practice open communication, 2, build, extend, and expect trust and respect, 3, hold ourselves and each other accountable, 4, respect decisions of the full board, and 5, protect the integrity and promote the positive image of the district and one another. Provide examples of how you will hold yourself to these expectations as a school board member.
Thank you. I'm a question asker. I think it's part of why I went into science, is that I'm inquisitive and that I want to understand. And when I am interacting and collaborating with other people, I totally acknowledge and realize that sometimes my passion, while coming from a good place, can sometimes come off and be a little off-putting. So I'd like to say, being action-driven, my actions would demonstrate and provide the evidence that I would indeed do all of those things. But anyone who can recognize and acknowledge that my passion also drives my behavior can quickly realize that I'm equally quick to listen, collaborate, and brainstorm in a respectful way once there's forward motion. Again, the action-driven part, if it feels like we're just talking to be talking, or if it feels like we are just stating something to pretend like we're listening, that active listening is really important there. And if I feel like I'm not being actively listened to, I tend to get a little bit passionate and sometimes go places. So I would certainly, though, do my best to adhere to these.
Thank you, Mr. Brownell. Mr. Hannafel?
As my own experience with business, we're working on different boards, also working with different stakeholders, that might span counties or regions. It's really just about being an advocate for, the majority of, the majority of the messaging or what was decided, and sticking with that collectively, no matter if your opinions you felt didn't go your way. Especially a board like this, which is so important. It's hopefully that board members would show the same respect that they would their parents, their own kids. And it's just something that I feel is, is very important in the process of any organization like this to join.
Thank you so much. Ms. Wood, same question?
Thank you. I think this one ties to the previous question quite a bit because it's also about being role models, right? All of these behaviors are role models we want to instill in our school district with our peers and with the students that we take care of. And I fully believe that diverse perspectives on our board are very critical. The Crosse board has very diverse representation, all the 3 educational institutions and local businesses and parents and community members. And that good, active, thorough discussion, even when there's disagreement, is very healthy. But I think it's important that we still have unified messaging when we're talking to our stakeholders. And throughout my professional career and on governance boards, I have a lot of experience working with various stakeholders, both positive and negative stakeholders. So I think that's something that's very important in creating this type of code of conduct and presenting a very strong face to the community. Delegating and empowering committees is one thing that I do on the Crosse board. We have very strong committees, and it's very important. About 20 years ago, I would have not been very good at delegating, but now I find it's very important, especially in a volunteer-led organization. If you don't empower your volunteers and let them do their job, they're not very interested anymore, and then it's hard to keep them on the board. And celebrate, and I have a little example here. I don't think you have time to look at this, but I have the strategic plan that kind of shows how I delegate. It's not much of me on there. They do all the good work. And then celebrating wins and being transparent about any gaps. I like to tell my teams, fail gracefully. We'll recover and we'll learn from it, and I think it's good to be transparent about those things.
Oh, thank you. I wanted to hear what that chime sounded like anyway, so.
I will always
perfect.
make that happen.
Appreciate the learning experience. Same question to you, Ms. Moots.
Thank you. So as a public employee going on 5 years, I feel pretty familiar and comfortable with policies that ensure positive collaboration and positive work environments. I do think that this is one of my strengths, is to work with people, and I think that showcases in some of my professional history as well. I think that I shine when I work with other people. I think better, I process things more fully, and I like having conversations with folks to kind of round out my thoughts and polish out how that's going to turn into action. So I feel like I've been repeating myself a little bit, but really, like, it kind of comes down to actively listening to others, right, and keeping an open mind. And I do believe that's something that I would be able to showcase. Also, responding from a place of compassion and understanding, especially if it's something that I maybe don't totally agree with or I have additional questions about, so that I can fully understand where those perspectives are coming from. I'm also very much interested in keeping myself accountable as well as others. I kind of laugh at myself a little bit because I am quick to acknowledge when I make a mistake. So I kind of, really could, see that being somewhat of a benefit to remaining open-minded to ideas and being okay with being wrong about things. So.
Thank you so much. So I believe we're back to where we began with our final question here, back to Mr. Hannaful. And so the last question, is there anything else we should have asked you, and what else would you like to tell us about yourself?
I'm just going to kind of go off script. It's so surprising, nice to see that, out of, I think there's 8 applicants based on the social media fervor. I thought there'd be hundreds. It's really nice to see the people that have come here tonight, and I mean, it seems like these people are dedicated to it. About myself, I mean, I'm just kind of a representative of, trying to, a youngerish father, I guess, maybe a little older, but with 3 kids in the district. And I'd just like to help potentially alleviate, I feel, some of the messaging that is just not productive, and also carry the message for the board. But you got some cool people here that are applying, and also you guys do a great job. You should be proud of yourself, even though you probably get a lot of slack. So.
Thank you, appreciate that. Same question, Ms. Wood?
I second that. Very, very well said. I see this as a very unique, brief term for whoever takes this role, and I think that my approximately 11 years of experience on governance boards will enable me to kind of hit the ground running and help you accomplish some things in that brief time period. And I know it's unique and not very often that this happens. I think something else that I think I can bring to the table is my global perspective to understand and empathize with many needs. I'm a first-generation American, first-generation university graduate. English is not my first language. Grew up very poor in abusive household. So, and I've worked in 3 different countries, for small to giant corporations, across different cultures, and leading teams. And I think I understand, and with my university experience advising and teaching and helping students, a lot of them also first-generation university students, I understand what these students in our district need going out into, after they leave our care, what they will face and what they need to succeed. And I also want to reiterate that I'm a very caring, caretaker type of person, yet I balance that with data-informed approaches. I love data. I'm a little bit of a data geek, so I like to use that to help make decisions, not solely base decisions on it, but to guide our decisions.
Thank you so much. Ms. Moots, your response to question number 5?
Well, I think one of the most important things to know about me is that I got into education because I absolutely love teaching. I love public education. I never thought I would leave education, as I've said before, and I did because of how I was treated as a teacher in this district. And I think it is really important to have someone on this board who has had that experience, especially a younger professional as well, because I firmly believe that we have great teachers in this district who need extra support right now. And I would love to be a part of the change, to have that opportunity for their voices to be heard, maybe in a way that they haven't felt like they have been.
Thank you so much. Mr. Brownell, the last word.
Thank you. I'm a firm believer that you need to know your history so you are not doomed to repeat the bad parts of your history. And I know that during my initial campaign to be on the board 2 years ago, I put a lot of emphasis in the questionnaires talking about my history in La Crosse and my history in the school district. And that was because of the perspective that I had, living in the system, working in the system, and having an intimate understanding of the system from an insider's perspective, and having ideas my entire 30 years of career how to make it better, because that ultimately, making the educational opportunities for kids better, has always been my goal. Whether it was in my classroom, in the school in which I taught, or in the entire district, that was my #1 goal. So my final little history lesson here. While I was completing my teaching and chemistry degrees during the 1980s and also during the first 22 years of my teaching career, La Crosse was the regional leader in education. We had an effective and progressive educational system. We had the best educator compensation and the best working and learning environments. Being top in the region was no accident. A great deal of multifaceted collaboration was taking place to continuously improve each part of the district to make the district so great. I hope I'm chosen to be on the board to be part of assessing where the district is currently at in 2022, and to be a part of using that data to collaboratively chart a better path forward. I know for a fact that there is a great deal of professional knowledge, ideas, expertise, and energy within our schools that has remained largely underutilized. As a board member, I want to play an active role with helping our current superintendent find ways to collaboratively utilize that untapped expertise that this district already has within its boundaries. Great things happen when we all truly work together, especially when the largest stakeholders are empowered to be an equal part in making a meaningful difference.
I'm about to turn it back over to Dr. Jimenez, but I just want to say, kind of end where I began and thank all of you for stepping up, demonstrating leadership, being vulnerable, obviously, and coming up here. We certainly appreciate it from a district administration perspective. Dr. Jimenez?
Thank you. As the board president, thank you very much for your talent and your energy in putting forth your names through this process. I can't imagine going for a job in a public way. And so being willing to do that in this very public way is kudos to each of you. So thank you so much. We will excuse you, and we will take a 5-minute recess. Ms. Berkedal?
I just want to clarify, are we encouraged to or prohibited from discussing the candidates during our recess?
At this point, given the interview process, the board will not question any candidate or engage in any dialogue with candidates during the interviews, and we will not advocate or promote any individual candidate. So I would say no.
Okay.
Thank you very much. So a 5-minute recess while we reset. Thank you. Ms. Steigerwald. Will you want Dr. Harsey to join you on that side, and I'll send all of the ballots down your way? Okay, if we could send all the ballots this way, and we'll send them down to Ms. Steigerwald. We do have a winner based upon our votes. As stated in our interview process, the candidate receiving the highest number of votes, but at least 4 votes, shall be elected, and that has come to pass. Craig Brownell has 2 votes. Brent Hannafel has 0 votes. Emily Moots has 4 votes. Anita Wood has 2 votes. So, Ms. Moots, you will be our next board member. So congratulations to you. If, Ms. Moots, if you could stay, and I'm sure Ms. Steigerwald would want to touch base with you, that would be great. If you cannot stay, that's okay. I'm sure Ms. Steigerwald can also touch base with you later as well. And so we will move on to the information item of our agenda, and we'll move on to Results Monitoring Report R3.4, which is involved citizenship, and I will turn it over to Dr. Harsey.
Well, we're fortunate to have Dr. Lucky with us here this evening, and we're fortunate earlier to be able to flip these 2 items, OE11, which is sizable, and this particular report. And so, Dr. Lucky, without further ado, we appreciate your patience and looking forward to your report.
Thank you. Yeah, well, tough act to follow. That was very interesting. Well done by all the candidates. So results policy 3.4, practice good stewardship towards the environment. This is a unique results policy. When we talk about curriculum, when we talk about standards, it's the action verb that always drives the discussion. And typically in our results policy, it's demonstrate or knows are the action words that are generally there. And those lend more towards assessment or demonstrations of learning. The action word, or the verb, in this particular results policy is practice. Therefore, this results policy looks a little bit different than the other ones. There are 2 indicators. The first is citizen science, and citizen science is one that's been evolving in the school district of La Crosse. It is a high standard. It is the gold standard. It is not only environmental activism, it is involving research. It's contributing to the field of research. That's a very high bar for anyone, and for our students, they are doing a wonderful job, and staff are doing a wonderful job in this particular area. The collaboration I listed from 2021 to 22. There were 4 projects, and in 2022-23, I'm sorry, I have the dates off, don't I? So it should be 2021 and then 21-22, because these are last year's results. So in 21-22, we had 2 projects. The first was a continuation of the Wisconsin DNR snapshot activity, and then a new one, partnering with the Ho-Chunk Nation, a prairie restoration project at Logan High School. So just a little bit more about those gold standard citizen science projects. The first is, if you take a look, there was a link placed there. You can find out that continuation of the project with the Wisconsin DNR. It's a student action and learning, an example of that. The second is that partnership with the Ho-Chunk Nation at Logan High School. So in this past year, the prairie is young. It's being built or growing, and next year will be a dedicated part of our biology curriculum at Logan High School in partnership with the Ho-Chunk Nation. So we're looking forward to that. Now, I will say with citizen science, it is also dependent on researcher interest. So although there were less projects, those projects continued and became part of our curriculum, just didn't have that gold standard of working directly with the research and contributing to the field of research. So those other projects are part of our curriculum now. And so I added those notes there. We do have next steps for citizen science. First, we have to just keep working on the awareness of the term. Citizen science, when presented to the board, and even myself, was, tell me more about this. So internally and externally, we have to continue to seek partnerships that add to the field of learning, make sure our resources align with what we're trying to do, build them directly into the curriculum rather than teacher one-offs or supplementation of our curriculum, but establish them as core principles. Specifically connect Summit Elementary. Summit Elementary does an incredible amount of citizen science, yet we haven't come up with a good way to connect them with, let's say, the Wisconsin DNR. And some of the projects, when we get to the indicator 2, will be about environmental activism. Summit Elementary is a critical component in that. And then I think this is the first time I mentioned it to the board, but in 2024, we are the showcase in the state of Wisconsin for the Wisconsin Society of Science Teachers. We're hosting it at the La Crosse Center. So during that time, it's a pretty exciting time, science teachers from around the state will come to the school district of La Crosse and partner with our teachers and investigate the different projects that we're working on. So we'll be on the Mississippi River. It's not just at the convention center, but it's an action, I would call it an action research conference. So they'll be in our schools learning with us and what our teachers are doing in the area of science. So that is certainly going to be a growing area for us going forward in regards to citizen science and just science in general that we get to share with the rest of the state. Are there any questions about indicator 1?
Well, Ms. Bauman and then Dr. Cooper-Skull.
So I noticed that last year's report, the next steps really mirror this year's report, in particular the building partnerships with external stakeholders and embedding in the curriculum. So I have 2 questions. Like, one is, are we making the relationships we need to make with those external stakeholders? And then the second one was about embedding in the curriculum. In the OE11 report, there's a review document of when different subjects get analyzed. And it looked like science was coming up for the 23-24 year. So after that point, would we expect to see higher numbers for citizen science?
Well, it's not.
Would that be an opportunity to kind of build that into the curriculum, or?
Yes, but it's not going to always be about the quantity when it comes to this one. Like I said, the continuation of those projects is depending on research. So when we get to indicator 2, you'll see a number of partners that we're working with that just don't have that research component behind it. And that was the reason why we came up with the second indicator in the first place, because citizen science is so selective and really hard to reach that led to indicator 2, which is more about an environmental action log, working with different organizations, solar panels, building trails, and things that I'll talk about in the second one. So embedding in the curriculum, absolutely. That's what we would want to do. What we've done differently with our field trips at the elementary level is I would call guaranteed field experiences, meaning that in the past, maybe it was a PTO or there was a relationship, but they weren't always directly tied to the curriculum. So what we've done is changed the field trips for science and social studies so that every student in every grade level will have an alternating experience that every student will have. So every student in our school district, La Crosse, for example, will go to the Exploratorium or whatever resource we have from each grade. That's different. For example, Emerson Elementary, it's walking distance to the Myrick Park, right? And they would have access to different resources. Or Southern Bluffs is closer to the Genoa Fish Hatchery. Now what we do is we fund that with district funds, so even students on the north side can get to the fish hatchery as part of the curriculum. So we looked at where the curriculum had the best tie-in to our field experiences and with our external partners, and that was work over this last year.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Priscilla?
So my question has to do with the metric for the indicator 1 with student participation will increase over time. And I know you mentioned some of the challenges of sort of stability and access and studies over time as well. So the compliance report indicates that it is in compliance. First of all, as far as the 22-23 school year, obviously that's taking place right now. So is the are there more students who are, should we expect that number to go up by the end of the school year? And if not, can you help me understand why that metric would be in compliance?
Sure. Well, I mentioned the Logan High School restoration, prairie restoration project. So that'll be about approximately 200 students just with that one.
Okay.
And as I said, we're still working on those partnerships. It's research dependent. We have to find somebody that's willing to do the research with us. But that indicator 2, I almost think maybe I should flip-flop them around to talk about indicator 2 first, in that it would show you some of the partnerships and some of the things that we're doing in this area, but yet they're not citizen science.
So with that in mind, and this might be something that a discussion for later, but I'm wondering then if you think that that would be the best metric, the increased participation, if there is some instability in the continuity over time.
Well, okay, so in indicator 2, I talk about 5 different ways that you can look at what environmental activism looks like, right? And the one that you selected as a board was practice, which is different, I would say, than when I look at the results policies in other districts, their metrics are often tied to participation in a club, or it might be science, Wisconsin Forward science exams. But because of your word choice, it seemed better to come up with that actual application of the learning. I can go down the path of, awareness, or I can go down towards knowing about recycling, and measure those kind of concepts as well. So I mean, that's something for the board to kind of think about as far as what do they perceive as the best ways to measure the practice of good environmental stewardship.
But you don't necessarily have any concerns about that metric then?
It's a hard one. It's a hard one. I do, but I think you should aim high. I'd rather aim high and fail than set a low bar.
Okay, so then just for clarification, since there is the project that you mentioned that's going to have an increase of 200 students in terms of the 22-23 school year, that's part of the reason that's checked in compliance.
Correct. Our school district year is a different calendar than calendar year. So I see the work that's ongoing this year as part of this results policy in some respects.
Okay. I would think there just needs to be a notation of that when it's signed off on. Thank you, Dr. Lahake.
Sure.
That
And I
makes
think we
sense.
talked a little bit about moving some of these results, things around to be presented at different times that were more in line with when you would have the full data set. maybe that's something to think about too.
This one's is a good time actually for it because it's not tied to any sort of assessment data that's embargoed. And in the last month's results policy, we moved to January because it's for public dissemination at that point. So this is one because our data collection is essentially having staff explain things that they did this past year. We can collect that data in August when they return, or in May, just before they depart. So this is a pretty good time for this.
Other questions or comments from the board members? Okay. We can move on to the second one.
Indicator 2 is environmentalism in action. So the working definition of environmentalism, and I borrowed this from the Summit Elementary School Improvement Plan, because I think it describes the different levels of activism that you could look at. The first is just simple awareness, knowledge, attitudes, skills, and actions. So you think about most of our results policy, we fall more into knowledge and skills, whereas a survey result would be more towards attitudes towards it. But we've selected action, and therefore that fifth one is the one that we've used for the indicator 2. We asked our staff to share different environmental activities that were students engaged in throughout the year. I received a list, and candidly, I went through and eliminated ones that didn't fall into the action category. Anytime that you're asking for teachers to share what they've done, we have this Midwestern humbleness, I would say, to us, that not everybody shares all the great things that we do. So I know, just like when we talk about volunteerism, that this isn't a complete list. However, I selected a smattering of different projects and activities that people engaged in that fell into that action action part of environmentalism. So you can see a lot of water concerns, which makes sense, right? Based on some of the things that are happening locally in La Crosse, that we had a number of actions about water quality and trout. They didn't involve a researcher though. So, right, so we go back to indicator 1. If some of these involved research, if we would share some of the findings that we did in our classroom with the researcher contribute, then they would flip into indicator 1. So they do work, there's some interplay between indicator 2 and 1 that I'd like to point out. Aquaponics, if you go to Central High School now, you'll see the new aquaponics area is front and center downstairs. It was upstairs, so I think that'll get some more visibility for our students. Seed planting, heirloom plants from the community garden at Logan, research and removal, landscaping over at Lincoln. There's some land conservation. We did work with the Mississippi Valley Conservancy, not research, just action, getting work done. That's what environmental action looks like. Tree planting with WISCOR. Let's see, some others. Our partnership with the GROW is one that we could potentially turn into. Citizen science, is that something we'll investigate, and other than lesson plans on composting, is there something that we can do to take it to the next step? We'll explore that as well. There were 2 walking paths built at our elementaries. One was in conjunction with an organization called Aura. The other was just at the school. Bird feeders, look at some of the family night projects. I could just go on Earth Day alone, but those are one-offs, so I tried to come up with ones that are more sustainable and part of our curriculum. So this is just like I said, this is just a sample of environmental activism in the school district of La Crosse.
Questions from the board members?
I have a question, and it'll kind of go back to some of the things that previous board members have stated. So I'm understanding when we talk about environmentalism in action, there's like this list of things that are happening across the district, right? But when we go back to the citizens and science piece only, my question, I guess, to similar board members is, what does it look like to increase those numbers in the district in terms of like the participation? So, for example, when we talk about the 10th to 12th grade, currently there's 12, or actually let's go 7th grade, where there was 105 last year and 105 this year. Is that because they're just essentially, I mean, they're obviously doing similar things that they've done previously, so is there more that we can be adding, or is there, like, are there more students that we should be adding to these opportunities? And not necessarily just the partnership piece, but I guess I'm thinking more like the quantity of students that are participating in this particular, the Citizens of Science.
It's the research component. So, for example, that particular one is done by one teacher at one of our middle schools.
Okay.
So if we were to increase numbers, it would be to get that part of the curriculum embedded and have the other 7th grade teachers in the other schools do that as well. There was an AP teacher, our AP environmental teacher that participated in this project last year that did the project but didn't submit the data to the research. So I didn't count it here. It doesn't mean it wasn't done, it just didn't contribute to the body of research. So that's that gold standard.
That was the piece that I was missing. Thank you. Because that part of like the teachers, like if it's one teacher doing this project and, you know, linking it to research or whatever the case may be, then that would make sense. I guess I was just kind of thinking of like from a district-wide perspective, if we're talking about the Citizens of Science piece, why it wouldn't be spread out across, you get what I'm saying? Like across the district in some ways, but I guess if that's the case where it's like maybe one teacher in that grade level teaching that for multiple classes or one classes or whatever the case may be, it was just trying to make sense of some of the numbers.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions?
Can I build off that a little? Okay, and I think this is where I get confused a little bit about results policies like this one. I mean, this maybe is more to the board. So when like thinking about a result policy, I think of it as like all students will blank, blank, blank. And I think with the low numbers, and I know quality is more important than quantity, especially for the gold standard citizen science, but if this is a result policy where we're looking at students leaving the district with this, the numbers feel like low. And I don't know if it's just like a misunderstanding that I have about how the results can work. But that's...
If I could try to answer. So our curriculum contains environmental aspects starting in kindergarten. Our units, our science curriculum has environmentalism throughout. It's more learning, application of learning. Whereas, like I said, I'm trying to move this results policy based on the word choice towards the action of it. So that exposure, knowledge, awareness, those are things that happen in all of our classrooms for all of our students throughout their educational career. I can go that route, but the data you would be more like the other results policies, which
Sure.
I'm fine to do.
Sure.
I guess so maybe because of the Citizen Science Academy piece, that research piece is probably I'm kind of stuck on, because I'm also looking at like if high school students work with the DNR to demonstrate trout survey techniques. Well, how many students is that? Is that the entire high school curriculum? Is that a certain grade level? Why, I guess in some ways would that not count in the other?
It didn't contribute to the field of research.
Gotcha.
So I'm getting the sense that the citizen science might not be the right indicator.
I think it works. I think there was just a piece of context that I was probably missing from like the understanding of the citizen science piece. But then I also do agree with Ms. Bowman in terms of not necessarily on your end, but from a board perspective of thinking of like, is this going to be something that pertains to all students, or are we going to also look at some of these small numbers?
Well, that is what results policies are. The expectation is that the language that the board chose was practice good stewardship towards the environment. Results policies are things that students should be able to demonstrate by the time they graduate. That would include all. I understand your challenge, which is, I think what I'm hearing, and you tell me if I'm incorrect, that at this point, being able to demonstrate that all students upon graduation of practice, that is what's challenging based on what we currently have access to. Otherwise, it would just simply be a list of the curriculum that students at some point will have access to in their time in the school district, and that curriculum may not translate into practice.
Correct, the translation of practice. So, for example, I could look at a strand within the ACT or the pre-ACT or the Wisconsin Forward and pull out an environmental strand and show that knowledge. And that would give you quantifiable data to look at.
Yeah, I think that's a conversation for the board in terms of that language piece, and I would suggest that we revisit that when it comes up.
And actually, that's, that was going to be one of the things I was going to ask, and consideration is maybe that maybe indicator 1 should be a subset of indicator 2, right? Indicator 2 is a much more broad piece, and indicator 1 is a subset of that because it is such a gold standard and it's a smaller grouping. So I was leading to where Dr. Cooper-Stoll is heading, that I think maybe it's the board that needs to have a conversation about what is it that we really want to measure. And once we can figure out what it is we want to measure, then the administration can then gather that data that is evidence of what it is we want to measure. Because otherwise, I think we're not talking the same language, and that becomes a challenge as well. So,
May I?
Yes.
So just briefly, those of us who had the opportunity to enjoy wisdom sharing or to dive into Linda Dawson and Randy Quinn's book on coherent governance, they talk about this concept pretty regularly throughout the book in terms of mutual capacity building. And this is actually a really fruitful conversation, particularly with, we've got a mix of board members who've been on the board for a little while and new members. And so to have the conversation around language and understanding what we're asking, I actually was going to bring this up with OE11, but this is a wonderful bridge of sorts that I think this would be a really healthy conversation for us to have, because we want to supply what you're looking for. We just need to make sure and I think we have to have a little bit of grace and understanding this is an iterative process, and we're still in our relative infancy with these kind of reports. And Dr. Lucky has had several conversations around trying to define, it's almost grabbing mist a little bit with some of the results policies and trying to figure it out. And I think Dr. Cooper-Stoll, I think you nailed it pretty well with how you described it. But the more that we can continue hone and refine and kind of chisel away is exactly what what we're looking for. We can produce the results, and then we can actually measure if we're meeting it or not. So I think this is super healthy, just the last 10 minutes even.
right, and it's also a piece of, we as a board do not want to, for lack of better terms, move the goalposts on the administration either and say, this is what we're looking for, and then, well, no, that's not really what we're looking for. We're actually looking for this, and then you go for that, and then it's, no, we're actually looking for this. And so I think we just need to be more clear on what it is we are expecting. So I think this is a great opportunity to start looking at our operational expectations and our results, and maybe having that conversation again as we get more board members on board. So great comments.
I think the metrics are what they are for this year.
Yes,
And like
absolutely.
I said, I don't see any problem with the compliance piece, as so long as we note the additional students later in the year.
Correct, yes, we can't change the metrics from what they are currently. What we're talking about is for future. So given what the metrics are currently, we have to go with what is there. So, yes, go ahead.
I would also say, to your point, Dr. Harsey, that part of this iterative process is also being able to hear what some of the challenges may be as we work through that process. So I appreciate that feedback, Dr. Lahecki, so we can think about that.
Other comments from the board? Questions?
I just want to add too, that I do really like the citizen science component. Like if or the majority of students could get that opportunity, I think that would be really impactful. So I'm not knocking it, I'm just questioning the result. So.
Well, and I think, yeah, over time, it could be something that all students may have an opportunity if it were to grow.
Sure.
If all students were to go into 7th grade and all 7th graders had the opportunity of citizen science, then we could talk about all students are able to graduate with that opportunity. So I think it's just one of those that needs to grow over time, or we need to think about what our expectations are as a board. So great comments.
I also appreciate the sample that you
Yes.
provided of the current environmentalism activities that are going on. That's encouraging to see the things that students are engaged in.
All right. Great conversation, everybody. So any other final comments on R 3.4? If not, if I can just have a quick straw poll, how are we feeling about R 3.4? If we feel that we are making, at this point, reasonable progress toward achieving the desired results, or
I would
with
say
exceptions? Okay. I do think we were going to make an exception, well, not necessarily exception, but just make a note.
The prairie numbers.
Yes.
Are there any other things that are happening that aren't listed that we know of, or?
I'm sorry, what was that?
I was saying, was there any other things that were happening that weren't listed? I know like the prairie with the whole chunk, but is there anything else that you can think of that might be coming away?
Not that I know of as of today. We're still getting set for the school year for the most part.
Okay.
Could add the Grow Lacrosse programming is a lot more in-depth and comprehensive than composting. They're located at several elementary school, and the garden teachers visit classrooms about 6 times a year with lessons that tie into core curriculums, and a lot of them have to do with environmental stewardship, so.
Correct. It just didn't have the research aspect to it. But
Right,
it's a great.
in the activity, yeah. in the one, too.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Lahaki. We'll move on then to OE11, the instructional program. And one of the things that we could try, we have not tried this before, but OE11 is a large OE, I think with about 12 parts. So one of the things we could try is breaking this one up and discussing half of it at this meeting and then the other half at the next meeting. Or we could go through the entire OE tonight. Any thoughts from the board on how we want to tackle OE11?
How much do you have to say about it?
Our next meeting is next Monday.
Yes.
And then is there a workshop next Monday? I mean, looking ahead to agenda planning, is that feasible or not?
I think it's feasible.
I would say so.
Yeah,
We will
we
have a
do.
workshop after, but the meeting itself is fairly light.
Okay. If that's the case, I don't have an objection.
Any concerns from other board members about breaking this one up? So we would go over 1 through 6 today, and then we would do 7 through 12 at the next board meeting.
Dr. Harsey can be concise.
That's a huge challenge. That's how I stretch your hands. But I can try.
You said it, I didn't.
Well, let's give it a shot, because I think this could be an opportunity for us to consider for the future about breaking up OE11 and seeing whether we like that or not, and if we don't like it, then we go back to just doing OE11 as a whole shot and just doing 1 through 12 in one night. But I think it'd be good to at least try it and see, because it is such a large one and it is the entire instructional program, so it is one of the more meatier operational expectations. Dr. Cooper-Stoll, you look like you want to say something.
Well, I was wanted to ask, I mean, looking through the report ahead of time, it looked like some of the evidence we've already seen, yes?
Yeah, I was actually going to mention that because of GC6, but some of that might have been before new board members were on.
Okay.
And so either way, whichever
Okay.
direction the board wants to go, if we want to slow walk this, I do think, again, with some of that kind of mutual capacity building, it's good from maybe a lot of different levels. And so half tonight and half next time, I think would make some sense as well. I can start and just see how people are feeling, and if we want to stop halfway through. Part of what I was going to introduce to the board tonight is some just stats about this particular report, including the fact that, yes, there are 12 policy provisions in OE11. There's 37 indicators. And then last year, when we brought this report forward, I think there was maybe 78 artifacts or pieces of evidence that were visible. I say visible because as you click into many of these, then there's links, and can be a bit of a rabbit hole, because then there's links upon links. This year, I think there's maybe 83 artifacts or pieces of evidence, and that's after we tried to trim. So, but again, to Dr. Cooper-Stoll's point, Many of these, because of the way GC6 has worked and the board workshops, many of these you're not a stranger to. You've seen in some form or fashion. So you may have clicked on a report and said, okay, I have, if not total familiarity, a vague familiarity with some of the reports or the general content. And I'll just keep rolling here if that's okay, and stop me if as questions arise. But I will say, there's of the 37 indicators, 34, at least as we had initially seen it, were compliant with 3 areas in need of improvement. Those 3 areas include areas that we won't necessarily get to tonight, but to plant the seed for us next time. They include 11.8 indicators 3 and 4. Those are related to elementary and middle school report cards. Now, those report cards of note they're from 2020-21 school year. This last year's report cards, they're still not released. And then the other indicator is 11.9 indicator 3, which is related to proportional enrollment in our choice and charter schools. That has been now 2 years running that we've not made that benchmark with proportional enrollment in our choice and charter schools. And we can talk more about that, of course. And jumping into the report itself, and maybe I should also just pause for a moment. I get to be the mouthpiece for this particular report, but there are a lot of folks, several who are in the audience tonight, who are champions for this work and help put the report together. And that's the easy part. The hard part is all the work that goes into the actual day-to-day leadership and then frontline efforts. So I appreciate all of those folks and just want to acknowledge their work. In 11.1, part of what the board has an expectation of the superintendent says the superintendent will ensure that instructional programs are based on a comprehensive and objective review of best practice research. In 11.1, one of the areas in which we do that, we have 100% of content and program areas scheduled on the curriculum review cycle, and they're an appropriate evaluation pace. Ms. Baumann mentioned this review cycle earlier. I would say there's a bit of flexibility in this review cycle if at the state level there is some change that we have to be nimble with and we have to bump and move something ahead of something else. But what we show as evidence there is just this curriculum team, and last year we had made a note that curriculum team is antiquated language. It's the Teaching and Learning Council now, and we will be updating that as we're moving into the next, now maybe 2 meetings from now, when we get to share edits that we're suggesting for the report. And then the School District La Crosse curriculum review plan is there as well. In indicators 2 and 3, they're largely worded the same. In the evidence section under indicator 2, universal best practices, if you were to click in there, you'll see everything from the importance of teacher clarity to student feedback to classroom environment setup, et cetera. And we shared this year, unlike last year, a couple of examples of priority standard learning progressions. This is some work being spearheaded by one of our content area coordinators, Melissa Ender. In indicator 3, you'll remember perhaps March 21st of this last year, Secondary Director Stacy Everson shared in a workshop with the board our standards-based learning efforts. And that's one of the pieces of evidence linked below there. And then we also included a book review process that helps us vet some of the materials that we're putting out there for our students. In 11.2, 100% of the state standards are reflected in reading, writing, and math curriculum. So we kind of ask these very general questions in the evidence section. What knowledge and skills do we expect our learners to know and be able to demonstrate? That aforementioned is a fundamental question a standard is striving to address, and linked below are the standards for both elementary and secondary math and English language arts. The board adopts those annually in July. Those are the first 4 links. The last 2 are just directly to the Wisconsin DPI language arts and math standards. Indicator 2 are science standards. K-8 science standards are an example. And then we give a science example in their I can statements. Indicator 3 is a letter from me, essentially saying that Dr. Lahucky and I can vet the rest of them to make sure that our curriculums are up to speed with either state and or national standards. One thing I will point out that I would just ask the board to contemplate for a potential change, one of the things we do is, we listen to last year's report and that kind of thing. At the time, board member Como had suggested, would we want to, if in no other place, right above here under definition of terms, just if you scrolled up just a little bit where it said state and or nationally recognized model standards shall mean. I don't know if that's necessarily the spot, but she said, is there a place where we could highlight Act 31 and have it articulated so it's visible? That's something that we might want to consider as an edit, and I don't know that edits are what we're here to address tonight, but I'd plant that seed and as something that was brought up last year, we made note of, and we bring forward as we're getting ready to make possible changes. In 11.3, an articulated curriculum based on standards is developed for each class or course following a review by the, again, curriculum review team, is that antiquated language. We provide the curriculum review plan is there once again, and then this time we share in a 6th grade English language arts learning target, and then a proposal form that the teaching learning counselor curriculum team would see. Indicator 2, 100% of curricula are collaboratively developed through curriculum committees. Again, trying to have voice, as much voice as possible. We do share the social studies stakeholder groups. We solicited lots of different voices to be part of that work. Elementary math curriculum, you can see some of the individuals who've been a part of that current work. And then again, the teaching, an example of teaching learning committee meeting minutes and some of the best practice work that's actually done throughout those meetings. If you were to scroll through, you can see some of that work.
Okay. Questions?
Yeah, go ahead.
Please, yes.
For the social studies stakeholder groups and any other group that invites community member participation, are there term limits for those folks? How are they asked to participate?
Yeah, no term limit. It's kind of an open blanket invitation, and makes me think back to last year. One of the questions was, how do you solicit representation from our LGBTQ plus community? Same kind of thing. We feel pretty blessed when we get as many different perspectives and voices around the table. And so it's not necessarily a term limit. We kind of cycle back and ask again, and yeah, we feel really fortunate when we can get as many voices as possible.
So people have to be asked?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. 11.4, we're into assessments at this point. Schools use district and state assessments to track student progress and identify areas for universal curriculum improvement. Over the last few years, you've probably heard of new and innovative kinds of tools that we have, like iReady and EduClimber, and so what we did was we pulled just a couple of examples of a 1st grade reading iReady and a 6th grade mathematics from out of iReady. So these are assessments that we provide and store in EduClimber. It's a user-friendly access, and we're still getting kind of a collective mass of knowledge around it. We're still training, we're still getting people. Right now, we're doing training with around our Attendance Matters initiative, so people can look up data, quite quickly and see who is attending. These early days matter so much about having students in school. But those are some assessment examples. You can see generically an assessment timeline for elementary, and then one of the other areas that we're trying to have an intentional reboot in the school district of La Crosse is with our professional learning communities. We had quite a nice opportunity just this last month at Logan High School. We brought teams from across the district together, but with those professional learning communities, it's based on data analysis. And we make a lot of decisions on instruction and student progress there. So we included a template that we're distributing district-wide there as an example. In indicator 2, this will be an area that I mentioned last year that we're probably going to bring to the board and ask if we could, if nothing else, tweak this a little bit, because even the indicator doesn't read quite right. It feels like it needs maybe even utilize federal assessments for tracking students or something to that effect. But we don't take a federal test. You know, it's the federal report is populated by basically Wisconsin Forward information. It does have some value in that it points out disproportionality and things of that nature. I guess what I would just say is that you can anticipate I'll probably be bringing forward and saying, can we tweak this language a little bit? It's not necessarily used for curriculum improvement, but there's a variety of other things that we can and do use it for.
Dr. Harsey.
Please.
If I could go back to indicator 1 for just a second. Unless it's just me, I forgot to mention, the 6th grade mathematics iReady, I believe, leads me back to the 1st grade reading iReady graph.
Oh.
So if we could fix that link so that we could see the 6th grade math iReady graph, that would be great.
Yeah, it does that for me too.
If you're making a note on links that need to be fixed. Also, the book review process link, it says we don't have permission to view when we click on it.
I did, it was just a Google
I was going to ask you
document.
that because it looks like a place to, a Google form to collect what books are being used, but it doesn't look like a review process or an explanation of the review process.
Yeah.
I'm just going to hold it until we get to the end.
It's just,
Carry us back to the beginning.
this is good to know. Yes. Okay. All right. Well, iron out some kinks. So it's good. All right. Thank you for pointing those out. Appreciate that. Indicator 3 here, schools use universal screening and progress monitoring. We just put an example from basically the most universal level, so that assessment calendar again, and as you go to tier 2 and tier 3, we're basically drilling down. And then when you're in the SMT process, we're really intensive around individual particular student's needs. And so those, if you envision kind of going from the broadest level into the most intense level, that's what those 3 links represent. Indicator 4, schools develop and maintain data systems to track and monitor student progress on common assessments. So each one of these, this is just a wonderful tool that Director Everson and others have put together that helps clarify some things between Skyward and Canvas and EduClimber. And so we felt like this is a great place to put this for everybody's edification. And so that's where we put a lot of academic and behavior data. In 11.5, a course guide outlining academic opportunities is distributed and made available online. This doesn't, we simply attach the high school course guide, so it's not very exciting, but hopefully that's honoring what's being asked for in Indicator 1. Indicator 2, this is an area where we did not make the benchmark last year. And again, this is all year kind of in arrears. And so we did kind of feel like once we got face-to-face more with students, we'd be able to honor that ACP plan completion. And sure enough, as Dr. Lucky reported this last year on June 6th, we were able to meet the 95% benchmark. Indicator 3, the district will provide opportunities for dual enrollment with post-secondary options. And again, maybe I'll start from the bottom up. Dr. Rotering was able to provide a very nice report. That's that last link there in the workshop, August 15th. And then Dr. Rotering and Director Everson created the Early College Credit Start College Now. That report is that second link in the middle there. And then on top is a report many of you are familiar with from Dr. Lahucky, Redefining Readiness information. And then 11.6, All students are placed in their least restrictive environment. 100% of IEPs will include least restrictive environment requirements. So we've got the 2020-21 Board of Education report in there that would indicate that, and then also a letter from our supervisor of special education noting students' rights within this process and parents' rights within this process to ensure least restrictive environment is honored. In indicator 2, tiered service delivery model based on English proficiency exists for all EL English learners. Our EL service delivery model, just so the board is aware, is inclusive. We start from the premise of inclusion. So that's really that first link. And then we provide our EL handbook and then EL student population analysis for fall of 2022 as well. In indicator 3, we talk about the concept of one size doesn't fit all in the school district of La Crosse. And I appreciate that the board has kind of challenged and asked us to make sure that we're meeting students with all of the diverse learning needs that we have. So Nick Marcoux did a wonderful job with the promotional videos, so we link that in there. But also the community service report, and then just a letter from me just detailing just a list of, certainly not comprehensive, but again, just a list of different opportunities that our wonderful school district provides students and families. And then indicator 4 here, successful completion of an action plan for developing the capacity of leaders and professional staff and culturally relevant practices. Dr. Engel has, obviously presented our district strategic plan for the board. That was March 1st. We linked that below. And then the update to the plan. I think, I don't know if it's official or not, but I think we're coming to the board soon with an update. I'm looking at, I don't know if it's fair, Laura's nodding. An update, kind of a second update from this last year on the strategic plan for educational equity and what's been accomplished in the school district. The 2 additional links here, staff development report that Kelly Schmitz completed before she went and took the principalship over at Logan Middle School. And then finally, our staff development schedule for 21-22 school year. Each of those links, you can see are just chock full of, are in honor of our strategic plan for educational equity. And we use an implementation science framework. And so it's kind of strategically built on implementation science and how we're trying to move the initiative forward. So it has some stability. I'm going to take a breath for a moment there as we're at 11.6 and just see if we want to pause, if we want to see where we're at.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments from the board on overall on 11.1 through 6 first?
Yes. So my first thing is going back to kind of like that book review process. Is it still common practice for the district to kind of bring in like community experts for the book review process, or is it different now? That's just more so curious.
Yeah, it was not necessarily with our social studies curriculum. When we're bringing in a new curriculum, we do with our materials, but not necessarily with every book that we have, just because we have so many.
Yeah.
So I'd say yes and no.
Okay.
Other questions or
I felt like a very nebulous answer. I'm sorry, Mr. Spivey,
No,
but
you're
it just.
I'm more so thinking like if there was some book that pertained to like a culture or a certain issue or topic or identity, right? Like, would you bring in those folks that have that identity as an expert to also chime in on the content of the book?
Yeah. I'm trying to think of, we have the benefit of having lots, I'll take the social studies, we've got the benefit of people who want to support and help us. And so we've got people raising their hands saying, I will participate and help. And so we've got even though there's an invitation, necessary, we do have that support. And so, again, I would say yes and no, but yeah, we have help, for sure.
And then my next point, I guess, is more so just from for the board, I suppose, one of the things that I'm kind of thinking, and in some of the indicators is kind of laid out in like having the letter from the associate superintendent or having the letter from the director of special education, but kind of thinking, are there other stakeholders that we need to hear from in certain indicators? And so I'm just putting it out there now because it's something that I've been thinking about, not just for these indicators, but also for some of the other OEs that we're examining. Is there some stakeholder input from teachers, or is it, curriculum directors or whoever it is that we should be hearing from about certain indicators and the evidence that's being used?
Can I add to that? I'll just piggyback up that idea. The other thing that I would ask us to think about is, with those letters, for example, is the cautionary tale about getting caught. And Dr. Cooper, still, I'm going to ask, I don't know if you remember this, but Randy Quinn and Linda Dawson would say, be careful you don't get caught up in process as an artifact versus action or results. And so some of those letters feel to me a little bit, because we're a little stuck sometimes, and so I would challenge up, mirror, I'm holding up a mirror here, but, with some of those pieces about what would be evidence that the board would say, okay, yeah, you're doing that. Are operational expectations being met in an authentic way that people feel comfortable there's fidelity and integrity? And so, yeah, and I didn't know if that's part of how some of the letters I feel have that quality of we're teetering. And so, something for us to think about as a team, as a group.
Other questions or comments? Yes, ma'am.
I think I also had the book review question, but probably because the link went to something that didn't look like evidence to me, so I'd like to see what should be there. But also in 11.1, and I think it might be answered in 11.6, I saw the standards-based grading presentation that was given to confirm that it's research-based. I probably could have used like a context letter or something that helped me understand what the presentation would have been like, even though you can certainly go through and pick through and find the things that support it. And then I just had a question about what we were doing as a district to support teachers in implementing it, because I know it can be a big sea change with communicating with parents and with students. I've been in districts that made that turn. So, and then I saw in 11.6, sorry this is long-winded, but you do have professional development days dedicated to unit development with standards-based. I guess I just could use maybe a little more context or information, or maybe what Mr. Spivey said, stakeholders from teachers or from parents who were starting to experience it, that would help me, I don't know, understand how the implementation is going. I don't know that was a question, but just some thoughts I had for those things going together.
May I ask a quick follow-up?
Sure.
Are you in a context letter, could you see embedded within that, for example, how there's support to staff for implementing, like in the same document?
Yeah.
Okay,
I mean, I would love that, but but if they belong in two different places, I don't mind reading them in two different places. But as I scrolled through the presentation, it was clear, or it looked to me like probably the presenter had added things from the audience as they were said, which I do a lot in presentations too. Like, you've got a title question and then things were added, and then there were research citations sprinkled throughout, and something that just said standards-based grading is supported by these research, just something that kind of gave an overview would, I think, make it clear that we're meeting that standard and basing the curricular change in research.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Dr. Cooper.
I think we also have to be thoughtful about, I know this is a conversation that's come up before, but individual board members can't direct those changes.
Yeah.
So I think that this is a good opportunity to, if there are, just as board members don't develop the metrics, that's the administration, that should be a conversation set aside if we want to come back to it, because that's the way, according to our policies, that should happen.
Right.
It doesn't change here.
Right. The board speaks with one voice. the board directs with one voice, and so it is not one board member who directs. So that is an important part of coherent governance, as well as, if I remember the presentation that was given on standardized grading, there was a lot of meat that probably would have helped alleviate some of the concerns that you have there as well. So, but to Dr. Cooper-Stoll's point, I think that there are comments that are being made here that are really good questions that we as a board need to grapple with. And I think it's just, I think what it's showing is that we have not had the opportunity to tackle some of these questions as a board with new board members. And it's been a couple of years now since we've had new board members join us. And as new board members continue to join us, these questions are going to continue to come up, and these policies should evolve. So I think that this is just showing that we may need to find some time for maybe a longer conversation to look at some of these policies and really have a deep dive into them. Maybe some of the more meatier ones, especially like OE10 and OE11. Some of our results policies were the good question of what is reasonable progress, and really having that deep dive conversation about what do we mean as a board, because we as a board are the ones who define what reasonable progress is. So that may be something, Ms. Steigerwald, that we'll have to keep in mind as we look at the calendar and the agendas moving forward. And I will definitely look to board members to also give me their insights as we move forward, so that we plot this out without overburdening us as board members, because this could become a very burdensome project.
Question.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
are you proposing a review of every single policy in a chunk, or as we, because my understanding was, we look at the report, we agree or disagree on what's presented as in compliance or not, and then the next meeting is the opportunity to do amendments.
I think that is a great process when there are small things.
Okay.
But there may be times where we need a much deeper conversation. And so in that respect, it may take where, we might want to set aside a workshop on a policy and really have a deep dive. So I think that our normal process is fine if we feel like the edits that we have are sufficient. But there may be times where we feel like we don't have enough time in the agenda that we have to really have a robust conversation, and it's going to take a longer conversation to really have it out and really feel comfortable with what we want to measure, and to ensure that we have directed the administration to have the evidence to show that this is what we want to see in order to measure what we want to have accomplished. Does that make sense?
Yeah, just for context.
Yeah.
So 2 years ago, when this district has had policy governance for many, many years. Then we updated it just to coherent governance, essentially the same thing, but some important updates. All of these policies were recently gone through at that point. I think it was about 2 years ago, maybe.
Maybe 3.
Laura, a little bit more. And then, that was in fall. And then the spring of the next year, we did some additional tweaking. So, and that was separate from like a board meeting.
Yeah.
Those were happened during a workshop. So considering that work was recently done, I do not think that there is a major overhaul that is needed to do that, but there's always opportunity to discuss some small tweaks to that.
And I'm not thinking doing every policy, but
No.
there, like OE11, if we wanted to talk about that one, we may not be able to accomplish that in a board meeting. That one could take a workshop and just have that conversation as a whole and bring it back. But, R3 could be one that we could accomplish in one sitting.
So one thought I have about that, and knowing that these are very recent baby results, that this is like the second time we're seeing reports, is if we did do a deep dive examination of the results. We're totally off. Sorry, Dr. Harsey.
No, we are right on agenda, so.
Like, how would we ever track progress on anything if we're just changing it a lot? Do you know what I mean? Like,
Well-
I guess, like, I just if something isn't working, then that makes sense. But if it's like, we can't track, I mean, we don't even have 3 dots on a graph yet on some of these, so those are just my first thoughts.
Yeah, and those are the great questions we should have as we look through those policies, right?
I share the same concern. We're just now going through a second cycle of some of these, and this is why we have had some grace when it comes to taking a look at the results. I think that tweaking some things here and there, for example, I think Dr. Lahuggy's report earlier is a good example of that. We're asking for practice, so that's our, for all intents and purposes, our student learning outcome. So if we need to rethink that language, that's important, but hence why I share that history. I'm apprehensive to do any major overhaul when we just went through all of these and are still in the monitoring process. A workshop that would help provide some context for newer board members at how we arrived at the policies that we did, because we just updated these for equity. We just updated these for these, So if context and history are important to that, I think that's one thing, but
one where I could say a deep dive, for example, would be if all we're getting is a letter from the superintendent saying, this is the evidence, maybe we want to do something different. Right, because the 3 dots on a page is a letter from the superintendent. Maybe we want to do something different. And I'm not saying that there's anything in particular in my mind where I want to do something different personally, but that could be one where we could say, okay, maybe we want to change something here, and that would make sense. But to your point, there are some where we actually have really robust data, and to make a change right now, how do you measure when you don't really have a lot to measure at this point in time? So yeah, I mean, I think that's the conversation we want to have, and given where we are at in our monitoring process, I think we as a board need to just grapple with that.
Well, and I just wanted to add, I like both the action environment policy and the research-based practices policy, but when I looked at the evidence, I had questions.
Yeah.
And so that was what my question was about. Is this the piece of evidence that matches with the policy that we put forward? So
Absolutely. Great conversation. Thank you very much for those comments. So we are just finishing up 11.6. Ms. Birkenau.
I do have a question on
Yes.
11.6.
Okay, let's get to 11.6.
We're back. Thank you. Regarding the social worker positions and the positions from the county that were added for the district, I would guess that the county's social workers' process for documenting their caseload is different from the social workers in the school district. So I'm curious about how that's impacting caseloads, and how do the caseloads for the county social workers compare to the caseloads of the social workers hired in the district? Or you know what I mean, like district employees.
Yeah, and this is part of you're asking about part of our whole child framework piece. And so we are able to bill back some of this because of the number of, I don't know if you know specifically, Patty, but there are some slight differences. But at this point, Ms. Birkel, I don't know if I can give you a specific number, but we have been able to like max utilize but we haven't run into any like pushback, like we're at our max capacity, we can't help you anymore. That has not been the case. We've had wonderful partners in this collaboration with our whole child framework with the county. And again, it's not just the county, right? We've got partnerships with Gunderson as well, and others. And so all of these areas have, our biggest gap, as I think we've talked about here at the board table, is helping our students know what resources are available. That's been our biggest divide. Not that the resources are there. It's like, do you know that they're available and you can use them? And so getting our students and families to know that. Part of what has helped is the Cooley Bridges website has helped in that regard a little bit. The development of a website to say, if you're having this issue, here's resources that you can access. But again, it's got to be with intentionality that we're approaching getting word out. But no, we haven't, in terms of the balance, I couldn't give you an exact number. It's something I can find out, but we haven't bumped into each other in a bad way at all. It's been wonderful.
Thank you.
So what's the pleasure of the board? Would we like to continue on OE11, or should we wait until the next meeting?
One last thought on Ms.
Yes.
Burkell's question. We're hoping to add more of those positions because actually they've been working out so well. And it's such a cost-effective sharing. Sorry, that's the last
No,
thought.
that's totally fine.
Would
That's
they
totally fine.
replace school district positions?
No, we need those too.
Adding?
Yeah, no, the idea isn't fewer. We definitely need them.
Not hearing anything, so,
Let's
not
continue.
hearing, what's that?
Let's just.
I was gonna say, if I don't hear anything, I'm just gonna make a call. And
I think what I heard him say was, let's wait till next.
I think you heard me right.
Well, I'm also thinking about our newest board member,
Yes.
and I know there's some things that need to be accomplished this
Yes.
evening.
So-
So, that.
Yeah, so, and that was gonna be my call, so let's wait. Let's finish OE11 at the next board meeting.
I
If
have another perspective.
And we will move on then. So, it's not what I heard you say. I did hear what you said, but we'll move on. We'll move on, and we'll save the second half of OE11 for our next meeting on the 19th. So please keep in mind, the straw poll will be taking place the next board meeting, and if Dr. Harsey, if we could ask you to just fix those links that were not working for us, we'd really appreciate it, and ask the board to take a look at those for our next board meeting.
May I ask one question?
Yes, ma'am.
So normally we would bring OE11 back for any changes to the monitoring report itself. Would we hold off on that and then until October?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So we'll move on to announcements, and we'll turn it over to Ms. Baumann.
I have some, looking for my notes. So the Bow Tie Classic happened over the weekend, or not last weekend, but the previous. And they raised $30,000 through sponsors and golf participation and raffles, which is pretty significant. All that goes right to classroom grants and supporting teachers and students. The other thing I'll point out is on October 24th, that's the deadline for the Gold Star grants for this fall. That's all I have.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Sorry, but I do have a number of announcements this evening. Usually I try to keep it short, but tonight we do have 2 workshops next Monday. So the first one is at 5 p.m. In room Tech 1A, so please make sure that you remember that it is at 5 p.m. in room Tech 1A, which is downstairs. And then we'll have our board meeting, and then immediately following our board meeting, we will have another workshop that will also be downstairs in room Tech 1A. We do have a referendum community information session at 6:30 p.m. at Logan Middle School on September 20th, so I would encourage our community members to please attend if they are able. And then finally, the Wisconsin Association of School Boards Region 6 meeting is October 27th in Onalaska, and there was a little document going around to the board members. If you could just check to if you're going to be able to attend, and then return that to Ms. Stagerwald so that she knows and can make sure that you are registered.
I have a question about
Yes.
one of your announcements. The workshop next week at 5 o'clock, is that part of regular board meeting or is that an optional? And the reason I ask is because a couple of us teach until
Sure.
after that time.
Yeah, the first one is on social media, so I think
Okay.
that has happened before for
Oh,
board
okay.
members. So if you've attended that before, don't worry about it. But definitely for the newer board members who have not had that opportunity, I would definitely encourage you to attend that workshop. And with that, I will conclude my announcements. And Dr. Harsey, are there any announcements that you'd like to share?
No, what I was going to add is about the community information session on the 20th at Logan Middle, and you have that, so thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And so we will move on to agenda planning.
Make a motion to approve the September 19th, 2022 Board of Education agenda with any additions or corrections.
Second.
Right. Moved by Mr. Korberg, seconded by Mr. Spivey to approve the September 19th, 2022 Board of Education agenda with any additions or corrections. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? The motion has carried, and we will adjourn for the evening. Thank you very much, everybody.
First,